folks, and welcome to this month's episode of Unfinished Business Television. How you doing? I am Jeff Galashaw, your host with the most, and with me, as always, is Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions.
I have seen some shit that will turn you white.
Yes, from the infamous movie Ghostbusters, said by Winston Zeddemore, played by Ernie Hudson. So this episode, we are going to be dealing with news and trailers. We might make it one episode, who knows? Depends how long we talk about news, because there isn't that much news to be talked about. But important thing happened. The WGA strike has ended. So yes, Hollywood is halfway back to being normal. We still have to get SAG-AFTRA back, and then we will get back. Unfortunately, it seems like Drew Barrymore, not her show yet, might be canceled because she decided to resume production with while the WGA was still striking, and then shut down a day later. And the irony is, the next week, the strike ended. And her whole writing team has refused to come back now that filming for the show has resumed. And I believe in a week or two, Saturday Night Live will be coming back to being live. Andre, what are your thoughts on this historic WGA strike ending?
Well, first of all, thank God and congratulations to the WGA for finally getting this deal done after many months and getting exactly, for the most part, what they wanted. So there's going to be bonus pay for residuals. Now there's more transparency for understanding the metrics for these streaming platforms, how many minutes people are watching these movies and shows, and more importantly, not labeling AI as a legitimate thing for screenwriting. So pretty much, I think they got all the things that they needed to kind of get back to work, get back into getting some movies made. As far as Drew goes, my heart kind of breaks for her because I'm a Drew Barrymore fan.
Same here.
I have her autograph at home back in the 90s when I used to mail to celebrities. And finding all those addresses. And so it's really heartbreaking to see, just because of the fact that they were trying to jump the gun with getting their show back together, that unfortunately her head writers don't want to return in spite of the current situation. And, God willing, they can work it out. And, she just seems like such a sweet person to have all that.
Exactly.
So it's really like I sympathize with the writers with what they have to do, and I respect it. But at the same time, it's like she's not somebody that really gets me angry or upset at any way possible, and it's just it's really a shame.
Yeah, she's not problematic at all. And
I'd love to be on her show if I was famous.
Well, same here. You only have to talk for 30 minutes, too. So it's not like, oh, this hour long, like, great talking to you. Now we have a bigger star coming in. Yeah, I'm really hoping maybe she mends fences with some of these, with the writers, and probably SAG she's going to have to deal with, too. Because, like I said, she's not problematic. She's a sweetheart. She went the talk show route because, she's getting older. She maybe wants to stay in place, not travel as much from movie set to movie set. And, unfortunately, she's not as in demand as she used to be as far as an actress, even though I wouldn't mind seeing her in a movie. In fact, I have one in mind for a future deep dive. But, yeah, it's just, I'm happy for the situation. I just hope, things go better for her. Especially after she dropped out of hosting the MTV Movie Awards to be in solidarity with everybody who was striking. So it's like, and unfortunately, it just like she couldn't win this one. So our next news story is Marvel Studios plans to hear pitches from writers for their big X-Men movie that they're planning.
So I think I have a couple of theories.
Okay.
I think this goes to the idea that if Secret Wars goes the way it's been rumored, I think the X-Men will come in as a hard reboot of the entire MCU. That's my prediction right now. I think that bringing back Hugh Jackman for Deadpool is going to open up, bring in the actors from the Fox movies to show up to do a big event thing for Secret Wars. Because again, Marvel needs that shot in the arm right now, and I think that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're going to bring back Jackman, but at some point he's not going to be there for very long, and you have to have a new actor for Wolverine. It would just be way too soon, and the universe is as big as it already is with this whole multiverse saga, so it makes more sense to just start completely clean. That said, again, the only worry I have is just how modernized are they going to get with the X-Men? And I say this because, you know, if you have Magneto still with the backstory of being, in the German Nazi imprisonment camps
Mhm.
with mother, he would be about 100 years old by now. And so that there is that possibility there's going to be some race swapping and probably boosting up more of the diverse characters in X-Men, which in one respect won't be bad if it's done well, but at the same time, I know it's going to create a lot of outrage for a lot of the purists who want things to be the same.
I just feel like somewhere Channing Tatum is still looking in like, don't forget, I can still play Gambit.
Well, there's been those rumors as well for Deadpool 3, so I think no to be left unturned in that one. That's what I believe.
I'm hoping for a Taylor Kitsch cameo if they do. My thing with this is, I don't know. It just feels like when they're saying they're ready to hear pitches, it kind of feels reminiscent of Star Wars, where everybody and their brother seem to be writing an unproduced Star Wars script to try and pitch so that they could be part of it. And I just think maybe they're casting too wide of a net, because I understand maybe they obviously, like you were saying many episodes ago, maybe the current writers that they obviously don't have as much faith in as they used to, especially when they keep seeming to turn like everything into comedy, rather than, or worse, light comedy, rather than having any real stakes in any of these movies.
Well, that goes back to the issue like we talked about before, where it seemed like after Endgame and they didn't have the Russos anymore, they didn't have Joss Whedon or Jon Favreau really, or even James Gunn to help drive the creative direction with Kevin Feige. It seems like he just fell on these Rick and Morty people to do the whole multiverse thing because they do it on Rick and Morty. And it doesn't work because not only are they leaning too heavily on the comedy, but they think the idea is now we have to send up everything in the MCU. We have to poke fun at the fact that, Captain America hasn't really been laid, and the Infinity Stones were kind of bullshit. Like, if you hear these interviews from these guys, they're not the right people to be writing these Marvel films. You got to have some experienced writers, or at the very least, I mean, why not go back to the guys like Chris Claremont and Jim Shooter and those other people that are still around who still do writing every now and then? Why not have them write these movies? Because they probably could do half a better job than any of these other novice screenwriters or people who write jokes for comedians.
Hey, leave those joke writers alone. They need work, But I understand where you're coming from. So, our next story, I guess we're talking about that. It has been announced that 3 actors will be returning to roles in the new DC universe, and as actors we pretty much knew were coming back. John Cena, so the Peacekeeper. Well, hello, James Gunn writes the show, so duh. So that means we have to bring back Viola Davis as Amanda Waller, and they had already said Blue Beetle was one of the first films of this new DC universe, so of course he'll come back, which is good for Miguel from Cobra Kai. And what are your feelings on this? Because you're more the outspoken comic book movie guy.
I think it creates more confusion as usual with James Gunn. Again, he goes and says, well, anything that happened in Blue Beetle and in Flash and some of the other recent releases, they don't matter. Anything that starts with Creature Commandos and Superman Legacy, that's the start of the new DCU. I really not understanding where this guy is coming from. And then he's trying to also justify the fact that, oh, it's okay to be confused. And I'm like, no, just put damn movies and just do your timeline. Stop trying to say, well, we're going to keep this, but we're going to get rid of that. So are we basically saying that with the events of the Flash at the very end, with the mushing of the timelines, that now everything is basically anything that James Gunn likes is going to stick in this one universe, and anything else that's Zack Snyder is no longer going to be followed up on. It just nothing. Even just talking about it just really like migraine because I just don't understand any of it. But I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I know we haven't reviewed Blue Beetle yet, and eventually we will. But I'm willing to give Zolo, forgive me, I can't pronounce his name right, but I would give him another shot. I think a good enough actor to carry that part.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Let's see. Since we're staying in the topic of genre films, Patrick Stewart wants to make more Star Trek movies. I guess he really enjoyed his time on Picard and missed the old guys. So, I mean, I have nothing against them if they're going to make these. I have a funny feeling it would be more like streaming movies than theatrical movies if they did do it. And I mean, hey, he's Patrick Stewart. He's earned the right if he can get the project together with the right people. I have no problem with it because, I mean, can you really do more episodes of Picard or another Star Trek spinoff series? And can they create an adventure that would be exciting enough? Because here's my thing. It's a great franchise, but you still want to have some finality that you think maybe they won't survive this. And if you announce, let's say, oh, we're going to come up with 5 new movies of this, it's like, well, we know they're going to survive the first one. And especially with this franchise filmmaking now, it'll be like, oh, not only will this be the first new film, but it's going to set up all the rest of the movies. And you have to finish all these movies for there to be an end game or end story. And that's the only thing I would worry about. I mean, if he just wants to do a one and done, I'm all for it, because I am a fan of the next generation. Everybody needs a check, probably, especially Worf, so, and as long he's a good director, just don't let any of the home team direct it. No, Jonathan Frakes, you do not get to direct this, I'm just saying, if LeVar Burton wants to try it, go for it. How do you feel about this?
Well, it couldn't be any worse than Paramount's attempts at trying to make another movie with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, which they should just give up on that. It's been way too long since Star Trek Beyond. Nobody could crack a good idea, and it seems like they're not interested. If there's no good script, why even bother get paid to do a movie you don't believe in? And it goes back to the same issue again, where it seems like, okay, we got all these other shows on the air right now. I mean, Discovery just ended. You got Strange New Worlds. You have the animated Lower Decks, which I don't understand why people like it, but apparently it's pretty good. And Picard, it seemed like it got the audience back in the 3rd season with the Next Gen casts all reunited. So I can't speak too much for that show because I never watched the entire series. I checked out after the first 2 episodes of season 1. But I have an idea that I just came up with in the last 3 minutes that I think could save this whole thing. You talk about a one-off movie, but you know what? I'm actually not going to joke about this because here's what they could do to save the Star Trek brand on film. And I hope Brian Robbins of Paramount is listening, or any Trekkies will listen and they'll pitch this, because you could take this. I don't have ownership of this. But back in the 2000s, after Nemesis underperformed, I don't know how true this rumor is, but one of the ideas they talked about for a 5th Next Gen was a big event film that would have combined the Next Gen crew with Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So you would have the cast of all 3 of those shows come together for like a big mission of some sort, maybe against the Klingons or the Romulans. It would be something that's going to have a big effect on the United Federation of Planets. and you make it the big epic finale of that particular era of Star Trek. If you could pull off something like that right now, because we saw Picard got the audience back with the nostalgia, and nostalgia still is kind of a thing in Hollywood right now. If you could get all those guys back together, there are people who want to see Avery Brooks and company come back for Deep Space Nine. They definitely love Voyager, and they want Seven of Nine to be in there in her capacity. Get them all back together for that one idea and just be one and done. You don't have to do a sequel where they all come back. It could even segue into a new movie with a new crew of some sort. Maybe like, the kids of Riker and Deanna Troi, something like that. But that could be an event that would definitely bring Star Trek fans in, because that's what they need. Another Star Trek movie with Pine is not going to do it.
Well, I mean, okay, you forgive me for my ignorance and all this, but does Deep Space Nine, the Next Generation, and the other one, are they all in the same universe and at the same time, or different periods of time?
Same universe at the same time.
Okay, because I remember how excited everybody was in First Contact when you just had Robert Picardo cameo as a hologram doctor in that film. So that's why I'm just like, I'm not exactly sure when these all take place, because I'll admit, I never watched Deep Space Nine, and I didn't watch the other one, really. I've seen bits and pieces, but never like week to week watch an episode like I did The Next Generation. So hey, I don't mind your idea. I'm still waiting for a Starfleet Academy, either movie or show. So
Roddenberry wanted to do back in the late 80s. There was that talk of, after Final Frontier underperformed, that Harve Bennett, who was producing the films at the time, wanted to do Roddenberry's idea of a Starfleet Academy movie with a young Kirk and Spock. It was going to be like sort of like their Top Gun.
okay.
And Hawk was Ethan Hawke for Kirk and John Cusack for Spock. But they wound up doing Undiscovered Country, and so, which did really well. But Paramount was like, well, we want to just get the old crew back together because it's the 25th anniversary, and we want to make it the last hurrah. We don't want the franchise to just end on that terrible fifth movie where they find God. It's not God.
Oh, that's a discussion in of itself. I would think Malcolm McDowell would be even more legendary as the guy who killed Kirk, but it's like, nope. It's still, nope, Clockwork Orange guy. Next, I mean, this isn't really a big story. They are going to make a third Sicario movie with a star of one of the movies we're going to be reviewing later, Benicio del Toro.
Are there really a lot of people who like Sicario? It needs to have a trilogy. I mean,
well, if it's the closing chapter of this, fine. Or if it leads to maybe maybe a series for Netflix, I could see it. As long as Benicio del Toro isn't the star of the series. Like Son of Sicario. I don't know.
But the second one, I fell asleep halfway through.
I like both Sicario. Obviously, the first one's a much better film. The second one works, but it's more of an action film. And, for anybody who felt Benicio del Toro wasn't enough in the first film, now he's in almost every minute of the movie. So, but I mean, I was entertained by it. But again, I didn't go see it in theaters. I saw it at home. So I liked it, though. And, I usually like anytime Benicio del Toro's in something. Even, well, maybe not excess baggage, but mostly.
We'll
Okay, so the next two stories are information learned through interviews done, recently. One is with Martin Scorsese, because obviously Killers of the Flower Moon's coming out soon, and the other one is with David S. Goyer, screenwriter of Blade and two of the Dark Knight trilogy movies. I'll start with Martin Scorsese because he's always a number one. He actually almost quit filmmaking after Gangs of New York because he didn't like being quite as controlled by Miramax and Harvey Weinstein on, I guess, his artistic vision. And so, that was almost his last film because he claims that took a lot out of him. And I guess I can see how, because you have this legendary filmmaker and Harvey sexual assaulter Weinstein is sitting here like, yeah, I know you're great, but here, I got a suggestion. Could you shorten it? Could you put this person in it? Do we really need this? And I'm like, luckily, it still ended up a Scorsese classic nonetheless.
Yeah, I remember the one story when he was doing Gangs of New York, when George Lucas came to the set and he saw all the big set pieces that he built for old school New York in the 1800s. And George Lucas just looked at him and he's like, well, you could do this now. And of course, listen, but yeah, I mean, that was probably at that point, that was like the biggest scale movie that he did to that time because everything else was very street level. And you had like Last Temptation of Christ, which I know also took a lot out of him. But yeah, I mean, I could see where studio politics at that time, you're talking about a period, I think, when Hollywood was beginning to shift, where it was becoming more corporate driven. And yes, having idiots like Weinstein running these studios and having their casting couches and really putting a lot of restrictions, even on respected filmmakers that have been around forever. Yeah, of course, I could see that be something where he would get so exhausted it would just want to make him pull his hair out. Thankfully, he's gotten to that place now where he's gained enough respect in this business that you don't tell him what to do because most of these people now were kids when Taxi Driver was out running these studios today. So, it's like you let the guy do what he wants. Plus, he's 82 years old. Let the guy do his best films before he decides to call it quits.
Well, he already says he only has probably one film left in him after Killers of the Flower Moon. And I mean, considering the digital special effects in The Irishman, let him use sets. Let him use practical effects because, yeah, we've all seen that movie. He also imparted that the studio wanted both characters to live at the end of The Departed so that they could make it a franchise. And
so I'm not surprised about this, and I'll tell you why. Not everybody knows that The Departed was actually a remake of a Hong Kong called Infernal Affairs. It had Andy Lau and Tony Leung. And Andy Lau's character is the character that Matt Damon's role is based on. And in that movie, it pretty much plays as The Departed did, but the Lau character actually survives. There's no version of Mark Wahlberg that shows up and shoots him at the end. And there were 2 sequels that followed. So it was a whole trilogy of Infernal Affairs movies. And so that's where I actually thought it was going to go before I even saw this film up until the very end. And yeah, I'm not surprised that Warner was even seriously considering a franchise for Departed. And probably Scorsese wouldn't have done the sequel. They probably would have had him handed off to somebody else if it had gone that route. But thankfully, they didn't do it. I think the movie is perfect as is because it's bold at every turn, especially at the end, that there's no call for a follow-up. And I think there was even at one point talk of giving Mark Wahlberg a spin-off. And thankfully, unless, you might want to count Max Payne as the closest thing to that.
Well, I mean, he's another. Mark Wahlberg says he doesn't know how many movies he has left in him either. So,
yeah, he's on the Christian kick right now. So much for a guy that used to beat up black people in Boston.
Well, don't forget he blinded an Asian man too. So, and the last big nugget from his interview. Well, for all those people who already dislike Martin Scorsese for his dislike of Marvel movies, you're going to get angry again because he feels manufactured content isn't cinema. And that we are in the dangers of franchise filmmaking, which, again, goes along with The Departed and why he didn't want it to be a franchise in the first place. Because don't forget, this is a man who the studio came to with Beverly Hills Cop. So don't forget that. But I can agree with him on how manufactured content isn't cinema. It's exactly in the title. It's content. yeah, it keeps you entertained, but it doesn't tell a story from beginning to end. It's not necessarily that visual. It's more built on maybe a joke or an idea or something personal about yourself. It's still not really telling a story. And content can just be incorporated to have one person. It doesn't need a cast necessarily. And I can understand where he's coming from because that was one of my fears when I guess all these sites like Vine and all of them popped up. It's like, hey, I'm all for entertainment, but it also feels like now anybody can say they're a director because they made a video that was on one of these sites and it got, let's say, 1,000 views or 100,000 views, and now people are thinking of them as cinematic geniuses. It's sort of like how I understand how social media works, but it's like how now all these influencers keep getting acting jobs, and then big shock, they can't act because their whole thing in life was to try on products, look cute, and be themselves. Now you're asking them to be somebody else on camera. That does not equal acting talent.
I agree with most of his points as well, but I also have to remind him that the class of filmmakers that you're buddies with, Spielberg, Lucas, Brian De Palma, all these guys, they kind of wrote the book on the franchise business because of the fact that they made movies that wound up getting spun off into sequels, toys, video games, etc. And so because they did it, everybody else kind of fell in line and followed that suit and had a mixture of success and failure. So it all kind of culminated with what we have with the MCU, the DCU, and what we see right now in theaters, where it's just mostly big franchise tentpoles and less of those mid-range movies that are getting harder and harder to put into a theater unless it's from A24 or it's in time for the Oscar season. I do think, though, that he's right in a lot of ways with where I think things are suffering right now creatively. And, it's easy, I think, to say to blame the writers that we have now that they don't have the mechanics or the storytelling knowledge that a lot of the old school writers had back in the day, like a Daniel Pine, like we interviewed the other day. But at the same time, it's not even so much just the writers, but it's the producers that are making it more driven to wherever the marketplace is. And so a lot of movies and shows now are being treated as basically like TV shows back in the old days, where you have a showrunner who just gives the scripts to the directors who are not supposed to put a stamp on it, just get the thing out, pump it out every week, and keep it consistent. And if you're not doing anything bold or new or even to make anybody think, that's what I think is starting to hurt the cinematic business in general, which is that lack of creativity and the lack of freedom to be able to create and do something that is different and exciting. It's just let's play it in the same old sandbox that we know works because it guarantees people are going to show up.
Okay. I have twofold opinion on that. One, I agree with you about his buddies being the people who kind of created franchise cinema, but then when you think about it, it's really George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. But with Spielberg, it was only the Indiana Jones movies because he never directed really a sequel of his own work. And,
Sure.
And George Lucas, of course, he, didn't necessarily direct, but he produced or came up with stories and extending the universes of like things like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But it came back to bite him on the ass because then when Disney bought it, saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to use your ideas for the future Star Wars," so then once they owned it, it was like, okay, so let's go back. Even his supposed business partner, Kathleen Kennedy, sort of just was like, "Yeah, okay, George, goodbye." And so there's that. But go ahead. But also, unfortunately, I think what you were saying, like where studios just hire, people can't put your personal stamp, do what we say, you get the credit, that's about it. And unfortunately, I feel like they're also taking a lot of filmmakers who do have something to say through their cinema and then putting them through the ringer. I mean, let's take Chloe Zhao. Now, she didn't complain of anything making the Eternals, but again, it plays not exactly like a Marvel movie. You can tell she put her personal stamp on it, but no offense to her, but she's not going to make a Marvel mainstream movie that everybody's going to love. Because even her independent films, for some people, are divisive. So I at least applaud her in that she pretty much put her personal stamp on it. But like you said, these newer filmmakers, they don't have that clout behind them. They don't have an Academy Award to tell the producers, I think I know what's best. And they're kind of forced. Just like before, you would never see any of these great classic dramatic film stars in franchise movies. And if they did, they'd be there for a cameo and a quick check. Now, every time there's a new Marvel Star Wars movie, you're just like, wait, isn't that Sir whoever or Dame whoever? Because this is the only game in town. And because now you have this trickle-down effect, that's why sometimes you'll even see like crappy action, like Jeremy Irons, who's in a trailer we're going to talk about in the future. He used to be Mr., dramatic, Mr. Theater. Now it's like, he's in all these damn Superman and Batman movies. It's like, Pierce Brosnan, you're the villain in a Jackie Chan movie? albeit a dramatic one, but still, it's like, no offense, you're better than this. No offense, Jackie Chan. Then when you do have a filmmaker who does put a personal stamp, their movies are barely released or are only released on streaming where no one can see it. And then what? That director's supposed to wait 10 years for people to discover it. And by that time, it's like, well, I moved out of that career. Just like 2 recent books I'm reading. Like one is Burn Hollywood Burn, where you'd be surprised at how many ex-TV writers there are who got burned out of the business. And one, end credits by Patty Lim, who used to write for like Freaks and Geeks, Breaking Bad, both books I highly recommend. But she's telling how systematically she got out of TV writing for all the racism, sexism involved, and how, she's a steady writer, but she'd go work on these shows, and there was no grand plan, sort of like what you always complain about with She-Hulk, And it's like she's doing all these like 18-hour days, and there's no personal fulfillment at the end of the day. And what do you have to show for it? And, there's like some filmmakers like Jennifer Reeder, who I think is a really good director. Her recent film was Perpetrator. She gives a David Lynch vibe when she directs. My only problem with her is I think she needs a co-writer. Her scripts aren't the strongest, but visually, great director. So, it's stuff like that. And then the thing that kills me is that when you do get exceptional mainstream studio filmmaking, it's by people who weren't even necessarily started out as directors or even writers. Look at Werewolf by Night. That's directed by somebody who was doing music scores. Or now all these Star Wars stuff. Drew Filardi, I think his name is, who started out as a producer. And he's the one who supposedly came up with directed that whole end segment of Rogue One where Darth Vader makes an appearance, So,
this thing that bothers me about somebody that's that much of a hardcore fan that all their whole life is Star Wars and they get that job and that's all they're doing.
Well, I mean, it's what their expertise is, But if, like, let's say, I don't know, Star Wars all of a sudden starts bombing, the problem is, now what do you do?
Yeah, I'm thinking, it reminds me of Mark Wahlberg and Rockstar, where he spends his whole career trying to be that band with his cover group. Then he gets into the band and it's like a dream come true until he realizes, oh, we're not going to let you write your own songs. You have to stick with the image that we told you have to be. You can't do anything else. And he doesn't find his voice until he actually leaves the band.
With that 90s hair, yes, I remember. Interesting analogy. I like. Which reminds me, we have to do that on a deep dive. Yeah. Anything else to say about Martin Scorsese, his comments or anything?
Yeah, thing that it actually wasn't something in an article. It was actually his daughter who posted something on TikTok. It was related to Gen Z terminology. She was just playing with him.
Oh, I saw that video.
Yeah, about King of Comedy, how Entertainment Tonight had called it one of the worst movies of 1983, and he still never really got over that. Uh, but that again, that was another film where he had some health issues, and it also put a strain on his relationship with Robert De Niro for a time, and really didn't get back to his true greatness until Goodfellas. And I think about that too because of where the industry was at that time, where here's a movie that's dealing with the obsession with celebrity and the dark side of that. And it wasn't really until a year later Teresa Saldana from Raging Bull got stalked and attacked.
Mhm.
Then years later, we had Rebecca Schaefer getting murdered. So it was one of those movies that was like kind of ahead of its time that people kind of shit on it back then. Only later did all of a sudden now people appreciate it. And it also was the inspiration for Joker.
Among many other films of Scorsese's. But yeah, see, King of Comedy. I'll admit I watched it as a kid, so I didn't exactly get it at the time. I was just for some odd reason Sandra Bernhard in a bra excited me. I was a kid, and I couldn't exactly figure out what race she was either. So I was like, But with that movie, I can see why maybe some people didn't like it at the time because it's a brilliant performance, but you don't ever quite get Robert De Niro's character because you don't really learn anything about his past until he does that comedic monologue, and then you're still wondering, was that truth or was that just what he considered jokes, and that was his sense of humor? So it's sort of like that thing with Taxi Driver. The ending, was it all in his head? Did it really happen? So it's one of those types of things, and I love the movie so much more for that. So this is why I'm like, this is a filmmaker you can listen to because even the bad Martin Scorsese films, there's something to see in it and to watch in it. Even though I don't know what a bad Martin Scorsese film is, I know ones that maybe I found maybe not as interesting or personally disappointing, but none of them would I ever say is bad.
Yeah, I honestly don't think he's ever done a bad movie. Just maybe okay to average, but he's always delivered 100%.
I agree. Like, I'll admit, I didn't love Gangs of New York, but I by no way think it's a bad movie. There's some recasting I might have done, female lead, but other than that, I think it's a solid piece of filmmaking, and we're not the biggest fans of The Irishman, but I would never insult the film and say it's a bad film. So I'm going to move on to our next interview story, which is from David S. Goyer. Dark Knight Rises, and Blade, amongst other films. He also made the film Zigzag with Wesley Snipes, John Leguizamo, Oliver Platt. When he turned down writing Batman Begins, and at the time, Jake Gyllenhaal was who the studio really wanted to star in the movie. And
yeah, he was on the short list along with Cillian Murphy, among others. I remember being hyped up for Christian Bale when he was announced because of American Psycho, and there would have been some interesting choices there outside him if they couldn't get Bale. I think Gyllenhaal would have been too young for it then.
But he would have fit in Batman Begins more in the role, only because of the whole casting of Katie Holmes, who is older than Jake Gyllenhaal, but when she's up against Christian Bale and like supposed to be the older one, it's like, huh? He also dropped that he thought Bane was cheesy originally when it came to coming up with a villain for Dark Knight Rises, and that the studio wanted Leonardo DiCaprio as the Riddler for the third film.
Yeah, no. I know they were floating Johnny Depp for the Riddler for a while. I think they were kind of thrown out of a loop when Heath Ledger died, and I think they had planned on bringing him back into Dark Knight Rises, and then when he died, everything kind of changed, because even the ending of The Dark Knight felt very abrupt with where he gets left off. So it
Yeah.
seems a bigger plan in place, and Bane was sort of like the last resort villain to go with. And I thought Tom Hardy was decent, that voice.
Hey, who doesn't like Bird? Hey, I love Tom Hardy as Bane in that third film. I just think the movie's all over the place. And then when you find out why he did it, I was like, it's such a fucking cop out. And that's why I only like really the first two films.
I burnt that.
Well, I didn't even see Batman Begins in theaters because I was like, another Batman movie? So.
Well, one of my former friends, who's a fucking idiot, he was like, "Oh, I thought the Joker killed Bruce Wayne's parents." Like, no, dude, it's a cultural reboot, and that didn't happen in the comic book.
Oh man. He also said that Dark Knight Rises is modeled after Rocky 3. And
I totally see that, especially getting his ass kicked by Bane.
And he talked about two other projects he was involved with. One was an unproduced screenplay he wrote for Star Wars universe, and it was supposed to be a Jabba the Hutt spin-off movie directed by Guillermo del Toro.
I think I heard about that, and I'm like, why? This is one of those, and still stupid.
I mean, well, looking at the Star Wars universe now, why not? Everybody else is getting one. And he had developed the original Blade movie, not with Stephen Norrington, but first it was David Fincher before he decided to go off and do Seven. And
yes, I did hear about that, and I think that would have been an amazing movie, but definitely more ballsy than what Norrington did. If that movie had been made like 93, 94, and if you still had Wesley Snipes in it, it probably would have been a much more harder R rating than what we got. But I'm still happy with the first Blade. I think it's a fantastic movie.
I like the first Blade, but it is like one of those things. But Fincher with Blade,
yeah,
I think
ability there.
Yeah, I don't think it would have been as hip as it was at the time, because that's the only thing you notice when you watch Blade is like, this is very of the year it came out, with the fashions, the like music video kind of club scenes,
Dickerson was up for it at one point.
Wow. And that would have been interesting. And I mean, I'm glad the way it came out. I personally like part 2 more. But yeah. But I have no problems with the way it went. I just wish, Wesley had been more interested in part 3 than he was. But that's, again, a whole nother story. And for our final story, before our unfortunate rest in peace, we have, and this is not a joke, folks, this is a real news story, Chris Rock is going to direct the Okay. Okay. Chris Rock is going to direct a Martin Luther King biofilm produced by a man we talked about earlier, Steven Spielberg, based on a recent biography that was written that gives a more definitive look at Martin Luther King, shows his flaws because it's built off of now all the FBI files that have finally been released for public view. He's a competent director. He's directed comedies he starred in. But, other than maybe a few scenes in Top 5, he's never really directed drama before. And I know kind of his career is like going this way. I mean, he's still a solid stand-up, but I know he wants to be deeper as an actor and a movie star. He even has a supporting role in Rustin biography coming up. I could see this as an interesting thing, but I would think maybe he would have wanted to start with a smaller project, because this is going to be really big, and, the commentary is going to come, but maybe that slap heard around the world might have helped him, to get, like, meetings like this and ideas like this made. How do you feel, Andre, about this news story?
Not only do I think the slap may have helped him, but it could even maybe have him surpass Will Smith in some ways going forward. It's a bold choice. I mean, because anybody that Spielberg could have picked to direct this. You could have gotten Spike Lee, you could have got Eva DuVernay since she did Selma, or Lee Daniels. Like any of these guys could have done it. But Chris Rock definitely seems like an out of the box choice who might have a different take on how to do MLK's story. And obviously, it's not going to be a comedy. May have some humor here and there, but it'll be played pretty straightforward. And yeah, he does have some competence as a director from the movies he's done, which have mostly been comedy. But don't forget, too, New Jack City, how bold that performance was early in his career. He did the second season of Fargo. So he's got some chops that I think he can direct actors pretty well. Maybe he could even take some of those inner feelings he had after the slap and, that'll give him some serious direction to his actors.
Oh, so no comment about his role in Panther, huh?
I forgot he was in Panther.
Yes, he was part of the 40 people, superstars who was in Panther in a cameo role. Though Bobby Brown had more lines than him. So, and now this is going to be interesting. We're going to do our rest in peace. But after that, I have 2 rants before we go to the trailers. And feel free to chime in on the rants. Unfortunately, this week, Michael Gambon, Dumbledore number 2 to some people, or the man who took over the role of Dumbledore after Richard Harris passed away. He was more, I would say, bulkier and kind of more freewheeling Dumbledore than Richard Harris was. But he passed away at the age of 83. I can't say I've seen a lot of his work pre-1990s, but the few films I did see him in that were memorable, I'm sure everybody, well, the one that made him the big talked about in the 80s was The Cook, the Thief, the Wife, and Her Lover by Peter Greenaway, which I did not actually see. But I've heard over the years, like, as a classic. The films I did see him in, other than the Harry Potter films, were films like film everybody Andre's age knows about, Toys, with Robin Williams, where he played pretty much the villain, the grumpiest man in the film, basically, in the fatigues, representing military over fun, with LL Cool J as his son. Yeah, they still haven't explained that one. He was also in Kingsman: The Golden Circle. He did a voice on the Fantastic Mr. Fox. He was in The Omen. Unfortunately, it was the remake. He was in a little romantic British comedy I like called The Rachel Papers with James Spader and future director, the one who took over for Bryan Singer on the Freddie Mercury movie, Damien something. Oh, Dexter Fletcher, right?
Yes.
He starred in Rachel Papers with Ione Skye. He also was in, he was in Gosford Park by, I don't know what's happening to me, Robert Altman. He was in Judy with Renee Zellweger, or Weger, Being Julia, Annette Bening. He also proved to have kind of a sense of humor because he also was a starring cast member in Mobsters with Christian Slater, Richard Grieco, Patrick Dempsey as Lucky Luciano, Bugsy Siegel, and he appeared. He was a Saturday Night Live fan because he appeared in Clean Slate with Dana Carvey and Ballerina Godino. Michael Gambon, who forgive me, sometimes I confuse with Albert Finney. He was always a really good actor who, once you saw him on screen, you felt his presence, like in Layer Cake. He has that final monologue that is memorable. He was in Sleepy Hollow also, but I mean, you kind of expected him to be in there. But it kind of reminds me of what we were talking about before when we were talking about all these sirs and dames who were like, no, I would never appear in that movie except for a certain check. And now they're all in these films. He was one who was like, you know what? I'll do it. So, hence mobsters and clean slate. I know you're like me. You haven't necessarily seen like all of his films, but what do you remember about Michael Gambon?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was mostly all the bad movies because I don't really watch British cinema like that. Um, the first time I remember him was Mobsters, at least when they did the TV spots for Alan Assassin, and he's like the big highlight of the movie because he's the villain in it. Toys was my first real exposure to him.
Okay.
Fortunately. And he definitely made a big impression on me as a kid, being LL Cool J's dad of all people, and just all the shit he was giving Robin Williams and turning the whole nice toy factory into like a military toy factory, and just kind of how he looked like he had a lot of fun with that. That didn't seem like a movie where he was like taking a paycheck like that. He was allowed to be a little bit loose while also having to be like this military guy. And don't remember him too much in Clean Slate because he was. I didn't know if it was him or Robin Leach when I.
The only time those two got confused.
Yeah, too much like in that one, and like it seems like you. I guess I'm mixing it up with mass guys because I guy's gonna fart every 2 seconds in this movie. Rest in peace, Michael Gambon.
This was not the best memories we could say about it, but I like you. My first memory of really a role where he stuck with was Toys. I agree with that, but I do have to. Well, first, rest in peace. You know, Michael Gambon, you will be missed, and you were a respected and very good actor. I do have one final story before we go to the rant, though. Julia Ormond is suing Miramax, Disney, CAA, and Harvey Weinstein for basically sexual assault and for them allowing it to happen.
That motherfucker's going to go to prison.
Well, I mean, he's still it. Well, he's never getting out. Let's face it.
But yeah, I mean, should we even be surprised at this point? I feel like there's going to be more actresses coming out and suing his ass, and deservedly so. So I hope she gets all her pennies from that asshole.
Well, I think the big thing isn't the whole suing of obviously Miramax and Harvey. I think it's that she's suing like her talent agency, CAA at the time, and well, Disney, which owns Miramax. I think it's mostly CAA that people are just surprised. Like, you were his pimps, and
yeah, well, I mean, look, there have been situations, and I've seen it up close, where somebody will go and say, well, you have to respect this person because it's the only way you'll be taken seriously, and they can get a lot of things done for you. So those assholes should be sued if they still think that Harvey Weinstein was like the shit back then and caused that kind of trauma to happen to those actors and actresses.
I agree. Well, I just wanted to bring up that story because I know that just happened recently and was a big story. But now for the Jeff rants. Okay. First, I've told Andre this in a private conversation, but I want to bring this up. Five Nights at Freddy's. What took this fucking franchise so long that now it doesn't even really matter because you already had 2 films that basically ripped off the premise. And, one was the one with Nicolas Cage, Willy's Wonderland, and the Banana Splits movie. The freaking Banana Splits movie ripped this off. So, I mean, there will be money to be made, but is it even still relevant, or is it just being done so they can say, well, we finally did it?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like when you have, like back in the late 80s, you had all the switcheroo movies, vice versa, 18 Again, and Big. Obviously, Big was like the big hit, but the others were just seen as knockoffs that didn't do well. So, yeah, the Five Nights at Freddy's doesn't really interest me because of the fact that, like you said, it's been done already in other films. And it probably will only make some money because of the brand name and the video game that it's based on. Other than that, who cares?
Time of year. And
I think after Cocaine Bear, I'm burned by Universal.
well, it also doesn't help that one of the knockoffs or borrowed films had a bigger star starring in it, Nicolas Cage versus I'm blanking on the actor's name. He was in those Hunger Games movies. Gosh, something. But you see what I mean? That's my rant number one. Rant number two, you won't get the first half, but I think you can agree with the second half. Hypnotic starring Ben Affleck. So bad, so ridiculous. Now I can see why there wasn't really word of mouth on it or any real promotion of it. But that's not the thing. And it made me start thinking. I respect Ben Affleck as an actor, probably more as a writer and director. But why does he keep getting cast in some of these bigger roles? Because honestly, have you ever sat there, watched a movie, and was like, okay, this looks okay. Wait, fucking Ben Affleck's in it. Now this is going to be the shit.
No.
I mean, he's not a bad actor. He's been good in Mike Judge's Extract. He's good in movies he directs, He was good in Good Will Hunting, which he co-wrote. But, it was like when he got cast as Batman. I didn't have anything really against it, but I didn't have anything for it either. I was like, okay. Not my first choice when I saw it. But, I mean, and now he seems to be the equivalent of Michael Douglas in the 90s. Like, we need a straight, white, middle-class male to star in this movie. Affleck. And it's like, how did we get here? Like, he's even thought of before Damon. It's when it comes to the box office. Hey, I'm happy you married J-Lo. Great. I'm like, why don't you direct her in a movie? Really, the only time I could say he was really good in the lead was Gone Girl. And, I'm going to put that a little bit more on David Fincher than him. Because, again, he's supposed to play this kind of bland guy. And that's, unfortunately, how he comes off. Or maybe he needs to go the more John Hamm route and just play up more comedies. Because, realistically, I don't think he would have gotten the lead if it wasn't for Kevin Smith casting him in Chasing Amy.
Yeah, he's one of those guys, like when you look at Good Will Hunting and you look at those two, him and Matt Damon, and you're asking yourself who's going to be the bigger star. I mean, Damon got a little bit more respect because of the fact that he still did a lot of dramatic work. He worked with some serious directors like Scorsese and Paul Greengrass, among others. And Affleck, for a long time, went the Hollywood route of being the A-list up-and-coming superstar, and then burned out with Geely and that whole year where he had nothing but duds and tried to play Daredevil, and that hurt him for a bit up until Gone Baby Gone, going the route of being a director, saved him, and then The Town, and then Argo was like the big point to get him that Oscar. So everybody just sort of rode on his coattails again, and now they're kind of seeing, well, yeah, the Batman hype. I was like with you. It didn't bother me. It was more like, well, you're injecting all these other DC characters into one film. Is it Batman vs Superman? Is Justice League? And let's also not forget his attempt at his last movie, Lit by Night, the last movie he directed, where it's
Air. He directed it.
But the last big studio movie he directed, where the marketing was just atrocious, and then all the personal issues that started coming to the forefront that were really having an effect on his career and caused him to gain weight and go to rehab, and J-Lo seemed to save him, and basically now it's just he's stagnant. Like, he's got nothing else to prove other than just to be, I guess, the fifth name on the list of who's the next lead actor we need that's kind of straight and bland, like in Deep Water.
Oh, jeez. But see, that I understand. I unfortunately think because of his personal life, his missteps have been magnified rather than being judged on just the work or the movies he starred in. But it also begs the question, like you said, where do you cast him? Because it's like he's the fifth on the list. It's just like with George Clooney, a fine actor, but if he wasn't known as much as he was or have his investments in like Casamigos, he wouldn't be a movie star anymore because he hasn't really had a hit movie that he has starred in over a decade. And, like those Oceans movies. And I'm sure that was more built on everybody with him more than everybody going out and saying, hey, George Clooney's in this? Let me check it out. And so, it goes back to the old star system where you have the Ben Affleck still going. I mean, some of his personal life saved him because of that stupid meme of him holding all Dunkin' Donuts. Now he has that ad campaign with it. And, like I said, he's a likable guy, and I admire that now, especially after the last script him and Matt Damon co-wrote Bomb, The Last Duel. Now him and Matt Damon are more producing and setting up their own kind of studio with projects, and they led to one of the surprise better films of this year, Air. So if he keeps going on that trajectory, I think he'll be fine, and then I can really be like, you know what, you made something out of yourself, kid. But if he keeps doing like, hey, let me do Deep Water too, then I'm just gonna be like, unless you're gonna make cult films for the rest of your life, stop. Like, why wasn't he called for the Haunted Mansion, Owen Wilson's role? Since we're just casting anybody in that movie. That is my last rant. It just made me wonder. This is how bad Hypnotic was that I had to really start thinking about Ben Affleck's career. So, like, I wish I was his friend. So I could be like, what? What was that? We get it. Stop co-starring with Latina co-stars because you're attracted to them. You have a wife. And I can see why J-Lo probably would have said, like, no, I'm not being in this movie. So, do you have any rants or anything you want to let off your chest cinematically?
I did the Snow White rant last month, so I don't have anything today.
Well, your girl is still employed in that Snow White film whenever they decide to finish it after SAG.
Paddington. So.
No, I mean, that was more keeping in line. They couldn't wait anymore. They held up production for her, but they want to finish the film. So they're like, we'll get a scab. Okay, so now, time for some of the best stuff in movies, the trailers, when they don't give too many away. Okay, well, since we kind of mentioned it earlier, I want to start off with The Beekeeper, Jason Statham's latest film, where he seems to be a simple beekeeper, but surprise, he's an ass-kicker ex-military who they've crossed somebody he cared about, so now he's got to go fuck him up. First he's fucking up this small guy, then it's like, oh, there's a bigger conspiracy led by Jeremy, I need a new paycheck, Irons? I hate to say it, this looks like it's going to be a very guilty pleasure for me because I want to see this movie. If they would just say directed by Guy Ritchie, I would have been there.
It looks like a better version of Homefront, and holy, they got Felicia Rashad for this movie when she shoots herself. What the hell?
Well, she was previously doing a Tyler Perry movie, so
yeah. So, I mean, you could easily dismiss it as just another Jason Statham movie, but it is David Ayer, and he's got some revenge for the shit he had to deal with DC. So I think, yeah, this one's going to probably be a guilty pleasure. Well, I won't pay to see it in the theater, but I definitely would want to check it out.
If it's longer than 90 minutes, I'll go see it in the theater. But if they give me 85 minutes, I'm like, no, you ain't doing that to me. I think it's kind of a comeback for David Ayer, since we talked about him last show and the problems he was having career-wise, and Jason Statham to maybe be in a good film, because he hasn't been in a good film since the Guy Ritchie movie he was in. Because Meg 2 bombed, and then Expendable 4, Big Shot, bombed. I'm like, here's a hint. If 50 Cent is on your team, this movie's bombing.
Yeah. That should tell you right away this is not worthwhile.
50 Cent is sort of like Ben Affleck. It's like, you're fine producing, staying behind the scenes. But if you're going to act in it, this is where we start getting like, I don't know if this is worth pursuing.
50 Cent is the star of the Dollar Bin DVD collection.
he's a Tubi All-Star.
Come on.
No, that's Erica Mina. And Omarion. So 50 Cent, I'll give you a little more credit. Your star's All-Star because you produce hit shows for them. And people remember you for Ghost? Is that the name of the series?
Power.
So, I'll give him some credit. And, hey, those first few albums were good. Next, since we just talked about Jason Statham and Guy Ritchie, Argyle, Matthew Vaughn's next film, which kind of reminds me of, what was it, The Lost Kingdom, that Channing Tatum...
Oh, The Lost City.
Yeah, it's basically sets up like it's going to be a new wave spy film. Then we find out that it's about a spy novel writer who might have tapped into something because now she's being hunted because her novels are seen as true life tales. And this film, it has John Cena, it has Henry Cavill, and some new guy who plays the title character for Argyle, who, honestly, when I first saw the trailer, I thought he was computer generated. Because he just seems so bland. It's just like an amalgam of all these different action hero faces that we've seen in these types of films. But because it's Matthew Vaughn, I have faith in this project because it does look good. And Dua Lipa as the femme fatale, I am there. What did you think of the trailer?
It looked interesting. Again, I noticed the whole like Lost City romancing the snow vibe right off the bat, and that's the only thing that might give me some hesitation about it, but it is Matthew Vaughn. He's got all his usual stable of actors, of British stars and American stars. Got Samuel Jackson in it. So maybe it's going to be worthwhile. Got that mix of humor and violence in it. Yeah, I'll see it.
Okay. Then we have the movie you have been waiting for, Dream Scenario with Nicolas Cage, where he plays a man who all of a sudden starts to appear in everybody's dreams. So he becomes one of the most famous men in the world until people start having nightmares with him in it, and it's beyond his control. And how is he going to set this right when he has no control over it? It's an interesting premise, and I'm willing to go see it. It looks more interesting than that film where he's the retired CIA agent and has to protect his family, because this is a little more like out there and what the hell is going on type movie, which plays into his wheelhouse, where he seems to have packed on some old age makeup to make himself even look older. But this could go back to like his adaptation type roles, or where he played himself in that one movie. Yeah, so I'm intrigued to go see this film. Well, how are you feeling about it?
I got the vibe of Eternal Sunshine when I saw the trailer,
Okay.
And I definitely think there's enough kookiness in it, in its premise and his acting. I think he could get another Oscar nomination for it.
We'll see. I'm not willing to go that far till I actually see it, but we shall see. Next, from Adam Green, I believe, we get Suitable Flesh with Heather Graham, which is based on H.P. Lovecraft, where she seems to body switch with someone, and it seems like that person might also be possessed by a demon. I'm into this film because I like the director, and plus I have been waiting for a Heather Graham comeback because I remember her from the 90s and early 2000s. She's a great actress. She still looks great, and it's another mind bender in the horror genre, a genre she has only been, or I've only seen her in one film before. And Horns with Daniel Radcliffe. So I'm really kind of looking forward to this one because it's getting a lot of buzz also. So I cannot wait to see this one.
Yeah. it's definitely creepy as hell. I could say that, and I also definitely needs a little bit of a comeback because it seems like she hasn't really been doing a whole lot as of late. Um, it was reminding me of another movie that I had seen with the whole like she's having sex and some crazy shit happens in the midst of it. But this definitely looks like a full blown Shutter movie. So yeah,
Leave my channel alone. Next, we have let's face it, we have the Oscar bait movie Made December with Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman that is kind of loosely based on the Mary Kay Letourneau story about a teacher who had sex with her 13-year-old student. They call it a romance. And she gets pregnant, has kids, and eventually marries him. And Natalie Portman plays the actress who goes to them to kind of do research for the film, but she might also be stirring up some old ghosts with them by, asking so many questions and examining, the wrongness and the romantic aspects of their union. And it's directed by Todd Haynes, who made Carol, Far From Heaven. It seems like this could be an interesting dynamic, but again, this seems like a very actor's film, where you're really watching it for the intensity of the performances more than maybe the story or the plot. But I will admit, I am intrigued because I am an unabashed Natalie Portman fan, and Julianne Moore never really lets you down. And it seems like a tour de force between the two of them. And, it kind of reminds me of like when Ryan Murphy created that series Feud, and you have Susan Sarandon, and you have the other actress in the thing. I feel like this is that type of movie where you're just like, ooh, who's going to cut who first? So I'm excited to see this film. I don't know if it's starting on streaming or if it makes it to theaters. I might actually go see this in theaters if it doesn't start on streaming.
Yeah, I'm very interested in it because I've kind of followed the whole Mary Lou Retinow story, mostly through TV movies, of course. But yeah, you have some two hard hitting actresses in it. Todd Haynes is one of those guys that I've been kind of like interested in seeing what's the next thing he's going to do. Ever since when I was in college, I saw the Karen Carpenter movie he did with the Barbie dolls.
Oh, yeah.
You can't really like put out because of all the music rights and the fact that Richard Carpenter hates him. And so it's going to be interesting just to see how they play that out. Because I think they fictionalized it, right? It's not like the actual.
No. They're not trying to get sued.
They're basically influenced from that story, and looks like there's a menage a trois with the young boy who looks like the kid from Cobra Kai, which I'm shocked they didn't cast him in that. And I think it's coming out on Netflix, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, it's
wrong. I'd have to check on it, but I definitely want to see it.
I don't know why, but I feel like they should have ended the trailer with the song Buffalo Stance. I think it would go, and then it would make it so 90s, if they did. Hey, that's when the crime happened. So, I'm just saying, I mean, make it a little more fun and funkier. Make it seem more like a Netflix movie, that song has a lot of pauses that I did not realize if you listen to the whole version, not the radio version. Next, we have Disney's next animated, hopefully heroic film, before they probably close that animated department again, Wish, which is about a man who usually grants wishes, but then somebody takes over his business, and then realize the hardships of granting people's wishes, because be careful what you wish for, because it might come true. So there will be a moral to the story in the end. I can wait for Disney Plus with this one.
Yeah, it looks like another Mona type of movie that will probably catch on with a lot of Hispanic audiences and Black audiences. And if it's got good songs in it, it's got a good story, people will check it out. It's not for me personally, but
exactly.
Much standard Disney fare.
Hey, I'm glad at least they're showing diversity. I just wish it was like something you could get more excited about, like when a Pocahontas would come out, where it's like, oh, I've got to see that, even though I didn't. But still, or a Mulan, which I didn't either. I'm not a big animated movie fan, guys. I can wait. You know, it took. You know how long it took me to see King of Egypt, Prince of Egypt. The only one I saw in the theaters was The Incredibles. Okay, that was the only thing where I was like, I'm seeing this here, and The Iron Giant. That's about it. Next, we have a film I really want to see that looks more interesting than Dix the Musical, and it is Down Low with Zachary Quinto, and I'm sorry I don't know the actor's name, but he was on Euphoria. Which is basically a man who's straight, or is straight publicly, has family and kids. His wife and kids go away. He decides to hire a masseuse, and the masseuse is, gay and is used to giving out happy endings. And they accidentally kill someone. And in trying to cover up the crime, it only gets bigger and worse. And it has Simon Rex as somebody they meet off the dark web to try and get rid of this body. And I gotta say, I really, 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 really want to see this film. I haven't been this excited watching a preview since Theater Camp, which we will be reviewing. So, Andre, what did you think of the trailer?
It's not my cup of tea, but it does look interesting because I've never seen Zachary Quinto do comedy.
Never?
No. I think that might make it interesting.
You never saw him on, like, the Billy on the Street?
No, I don't.
Yes, he's like Bridges right. He's known more for drama, but he can do comedy. And plus, he always has that dramatic face. So it's like, it will be interesting. And it doesn't have Jim Parsons in it. So I saw Jim Parsons, spoiler alert, so don't come after me, people. And it'll probably definitely be better than what was Billy on the Streets, gay romantic comedy.
Bros.
Yeah, which I really was hoping was going to be good. No. So, for our final movie, or trailer, we have John Woo back in the saddle, making balls to the wall action with Silent Night, or as many people have called it, the Punisher movie without the skull on the chest. I still want to see it. I don't care. I will admit, I'm not the biggest Joel Kinnaman fan, but I still want to see this movie because I want to see Woo. I want to see those doves flying when a car flips over. If they can somehow bring Nicolas Cage into this movie, I am really there in a cameo. Shit, how did he not get the villain role? Is it because the villain might be Hispanic? Because I want to see this. This is like 90s action altogether. They should have just called it The Punisher's Cousin or something like that. But I will be in the theater that week watching it, or maybe the second week, because I don't like necessarily always going the first week.
Yeah, so for me, I was a big John Woo fan back in the 2000s, not just because of Face Off and Mission Impossible 2, but I went back and I went and saw all of those Hong Kong movies, A Better Tomorrow 1 and 2, The Killer, Hard Boiled, Bullet to the Head. I mean, those films really had an impact on me as a filmmaker, and the Hollywood stuff was just very much John Woo pulled back.
Watered down.
Yeah, totally watered down because he had to do a lot of PG-13 shit where he couldn't be as intense with the violence. And, even with the dramatic stuff, he couldn't be overly dramatic, right? Without Chow Yun-fat, it's not really the pure John Woo that we're used to. And yet he influenced so much of cinema at that time and then in the early 2000s with The Matrix. So for a long time, after Paycheck of all movies, we didn't get anything from him other than his Hong Kong work and then that forgettable Netflix movie he did, which I don't remember the name of it and it wasn't that good. But this looks like a true return to form for John Woo, and he's going experimental by making it primarily a silent film that has, I guess, all driven by sound effects because Joel Kinnaman doesn't talk, which might be a good thing to not have Joel Kinnaman talk. Because, like said about his acting ability in most movies that he's in. So that's what gets me excited. This looks like it's one of those movies that has balls to it. And if you're going to see a John Woo movie in the style of Hard Boiled or Better Tomorrow 1 and 2, that's the guy I want, not the guy that did Paycheck.
Well, I just need that. This film only needs one thing for it to be great: a lot of guns and pointed at each other, a lot of Mexican standoffs, and not just because the villains are Mexican. It also unfortunately reminds me of that Jennifer Garner action movie a little. So just looking at the premise, now is it going to be a true silent film or is it just his character is silent throughout?
I'm going to guess his character is the only one that's silent.
Okay. Now, if it had been a silent movie, I would have given him a medal because up to A Quiet Place, most movies aren't really, especially with action, aren't really, you still need to be like, number one, where are you? Hello? You need stupid scenes like that or all this exponential. No, I can't. The villain or the henchman has to explain why he won't run, stuff like that. So, I mean, obviously, knowing us, we'll both go see it together. And so, that is the trailers for this episode. And now we're on to our reviews. So, let's build up the momentum. So, we're going to start with the latest movie from Netflix, Reptile, with a kind of impressive cast. I shouldn't be that mean. With an impressive cast. Benicio del Toro, Alicia Silverstone, Eric Bogosian, Justin Timberlake, Matilda Lutz, Dominic Lombardozzi from The Wire. And this is a kind of a police procedural thriller where Benicio del Toro plays a newly transferred veteran detective who's moved to town with his wife. The captain is, I believe, her uncle. And, they're investigating a murder of a real estate agent's wife. He has this real estate dynasty, played by Justin Timberlake. And his mother is Frances Fisher, who, is the matriarch of the family. And as he's investigating the case, it kind of gets more murky and might lead to some surprising suspects. And a conspiracy! And now this movie was co-written by Benicio del Toro, who has recently said that he's getting more into the production side, especially after working with Steven Soderbergh on the Che movie. So he's starting to write and might one day direct when he's not appearing in Wes Anderson movies. And this film, it's intriguing. One of the red herrings, maybe, is a creepy guy played by Michael Pitt. And this film, I don't know why, it reminds me of that Denzel Washington movie with Rami Malek and Jared Leto. Except this one's more entertaining. But this is also one of those almost movies. Like, everything is so intriguing here. But then when it's all revealed, it's just like, it's not quite as hard-hitting as I was going to hope it was going to go. And I can't put it all squarely on the shoulders of Justin Timberlake, though I kind of wish they would have recast that role. He does what he needs to do, but it's sort of like Ashton Kutcher in that movie with B.J. Novak. It's where he has such an interesting character, but if it was a better actor, it would have been more memorable. And I feel the same way here, especially when you look at the cast that's such full of hard hitters, and then you put in rookie Justin Timberlake, and it's like, maybe we should have gone with Alden Ehrenreich, or maybe we should have called Josh Hartnett, Okay, now for what I think of like I said, I like it. I'm glad I saw it on Netflix and didn't pay to see it. It's not a bad movie, but it's more like a passable movie where this kind of, depending on how you see the ending, this could have been a franchise easily, like those Tom Selleck TV movies where he plays a character. I liked more of it than I didn't like it, and it was interesting to see Michael Pitt make a comeback on the big screen, playing weirdos again with jet black hair for some reason. What did you feel about Reptile? Mm.
I actually was surprised how much I liked it. I went into the movie not knowing anything besides the cast that was in it.
Mm-hmm.
First, I was like thinking with Justin Timberlake that it was going to be another Gone Girl type of movie where he just doesn't like his wife and then the wife gets murdered and he's the number one suspect, which it does kind of play that way. I was shocked to see that Alicia Silverstone was playing Benicio del Toro's wife, and we had a reunion of excess baggage. That came
Yes.
I guess he just really liked working with her and wanted to work with her again, you know, because otherwise that could have been anybody's part to play.
Well, before you go on, let's just remember she chose him for excess baggage. It wasn't like he auditioned for it. Since she was Oh yes, since she was producing it, they asked her who did she want as her co-star. She pulls out Benicio del Toro out of nowhere because I guess she liked the usual suspects. So maybe he returned the favor.
But the thing is, what I like about this movie is the way that it twists and turns. I know you're not crazy about the ending, but the whole idea, like you're thinking, okay, it's this creepy, weird guy that keeps coming around the house, and he's got something to do with the murder. But then it switches into a corrupt cop story, and then you're thinking they're going to go after Alicia Silverstone, and then she kind of pulls the reversal on the guy, and then you have the bit with. I don't know if he even really needed the subplot. I guess they were trying to add more context to it. The whole deal with the pool boy or whoever it was supposed to be, the gardener, that he kept watching and
Oh
thinking
yeah.
about trying to have a thing with her, and there was sort of like a mystery around that never quite got resolved. But what I gotta say is Benicio del Toro just was really interesting in this movie. I thought at times he was giving me some Charles Bronson vibes. That's how much good movie. So much so that I agree. This could easily have been a franchise for him, and you could have seen this character go on and do other cases, and you still bring in Alicia Silverstone. Justin Timberlake, yeah, you could have gotten a better actor for it. That was kind of a weird choice. But other than that, highly entertained by it. Different kind of detective tale that I've been kind of craving for some time. And I would definitely recommend seeing it. Highly recommend it, actually.
Well, for me, what I liked about it when I first saw the trailer was that it seemed like anybody in the trailer, including Benicio del Toro, could have been the guilty party of the, in this murder. But then once the film gets going, even though he looks guilty because of it's Benicio del Toro, he's actually the most innocent person in this film. And and I guess they keep mentioning about like why he had to transfer there, that little bit of his past. But I also like the fact that even though she's playing the wife role, he gives Alicia Silverstone's character something to do rather than just react or be there for him. Like she plays an important role throughout the film, and she's not just some damsel in distress. I mean, some twists kind of are like telegraphed a little later in the film where you're like, okay, now I know what's going on. But like I said, it does keep itself interesting. I'd give it a recommend. I wouldn't highly recommend it, but if anybody's just looking for something more interesting that doesn't feel so much by the book, I'd say give this film a chance. But have a little bit of patience. It does pay off. So we both are giving that a recommendation. You more than me. Okay, Siskel. And next we have the movie I have been waiting for Andre to watch, and that is the horror film, the super ridiculous, The Pope's Exorcist, with today's modern B-movie dramatic actor, Russell Crowe, where he plays exactly what the title says, the Pope's Exorcist. He works for the Vatican on exclusive exorcism cases, and for some odd reason, he plays him with a very heavy Italian accent. That I was like, is he playing like Super Mario in this movie? It got that ridiculous. And he's called in on a case of a possessed child, and it leads to something bigger. I don't want to give too much away, but I have to say this film, while it's cheesy and fun, it really doesn't get interesting till the last, I would say, 20 minutes. And it reminded me, not as crazy, but it reminded me of that James Wan movie, the one you hated and couldn't even finish.
What was it, The Conjuring?
No, the one where the girl, Maleficent. Oh, no, it's not Maleficent. The one where, I don't want to give away this movie's ending, but it has a crazy final 20 minutes also. And it reminded me of that. It's not as crazy, but it seemed like watching The Pope's Exorcist, they hold everything up until the end. Like any scares are held till the end. Any of the real demon stuff, fighting a demon is held up to the end. I mean, there's still some the child trying to get at his mother's breast, but no boobs show. But then at the end, there's boobs, not from the mother, but another character. And then, this thing is leaping everywhere. Oh, now the daughter's possessed. Now this person's possessed. And, it's him and this, amateur priest, fighting off all these. And then that's when the special effects budget comes in. Because now we got fire and brimstone and everything. And Russell Crowe's just, having fun. He's in, He's in Thor mode here, basically. He's not taking any of this seriously. And then the ending, I'm not going to give too much away, but it leads to its own Avengers-style movie. I wouldn't recommend it, but it has to be seen to be believed. And it's kind of shocking, considering it's directed by Julius Avery, who made Overlord, which was such a good movie from beginning to end by putting a twist on what you would think. And this movie plays so basic until the final 20 minutes. So that is mine. I would not recommend, but like I said, if you're looking for something batshit crazy and just something to put on, give The Pope's Exorcist a try. Andre, what did you think of The Pope of the Exorcisto?
I think I knew from the beginning as I started watching it, and he does the first exorcism, that this was being a setup for a franchise as opposed to just an isolated incident that's based on a real event, which apparently it was. And the real guy that he's based on did a number of exorcisms over the years before he passed away, which I didn't know until the very end.
Okay.
And so, I agree with you. There's not really a lot of exciting things that happen up until the last 20, 30 minutes of the movie. That's where it starts to go into Ghostbusters and ice mode with the special effects and the greater CG driven possessions and things like that. And I think Russell Crowe is serviceable for what he needs to do. And yeah,
serviceable? Really?
Yeah. The thing that I still laugh about with this movie has nothing to do with the movie itself, but the marketing. So when they did WrestleMania this year, I with this movie, and there was actually an actual match that was based on this film. It was like a cage match, and they had Russell Crowe on the Titantron, doing some ridiculous speech, he's in character. And I'm thinking it was just something specific for the movie up until he was WrestleMania. Just what the?
Oh, geez.
This is the depths of how low this man who won an Oscar for, Beautiful Mind and had done Gladiator, great films, is now doing sponsorships for WrestleMania. What the hell is going on here? This guy.
Meg Ryan ruined him, I guess.
She probably ruined her career more than his, to be honest, and helped Dennis Quaid at that time.
I was just sitting here waiting, RZA, why did not the RZA direct this, or at least him play the young priest? Now we got a movie.
Yeah, they could have definitely fit RZA, and they were having played a black priest.
Exactly. And then there's those scenes where they go back to the Vatican, and the Pope is hearing all this news, and oh no, I trust. I don't know his character's name, so I'm just gonna say Emilio. I trust him. Shit, where's Emilio Estevez? He could have been in this movie. Well, no, Charlie Sheen couldn't. Emilio can. But would you recommend it?
Not really. I mean, once you like the first Exorcist film, anything else that comes after, even the sequels, are just knockoffs.
Fair enough. Yeah, I agree. You don't need to see this, but the movie I was trying to think of was *Malignant*.
Yeah.
That movie. I mean, *Malignant*. The final 20 minutes are more entertaining than anything in this film, but it has that same type of crazy ending. So next, we move on to the good films. Theater Camp, directed by Molly Gordon and Nick Lieberman. Andre can vouch for this. Ever since I saw the trailer, I was like, I'm going to see this movie. Soon as I saw that they had a Broadway musical with Play Cocaine, I was like, this is the movie for me. And this movie did not let me down. It's basically a kind of probably single camera comedy. It's shot like a documentary where it's basically about a theater camp that is kind of the matriarch of the theater camp goes into a coma. Her son is left to run it, and he's like a wannabe influencer businessman, and he knows nothing of this culture. And all these kids are theater kids. All the counselors are pretty much, wannabe actors, actresses, production designers, costume designers. And we see all of them. A few of them have their own stories. Some are just side characters, like his assistant, his technical assistant, who has gone to the camp ever since they were a child. And of course, they get bigger in the later. But also Molly Gordon's character and Ben Platt, who is a Tony Award-winning actor, and the guy who a lot of people ridiculed for starring in the movie version of his hit Broadway show that he was on because he looked too old and like a narc. But some of you also might remember from Pitch Perfect. So him and Molly Gordon are two people who supposedly grew close in theater camp, and then they both supposedly failed out of Juilliard, and they come every summer to teach, and then it's threatened when she gets a job on a cruise ship. Will their friendship survive? Look, you don't watch this film for the plot. It's just to enjoy the ambiance. It might remind some of you of the film Camp, which was also about theater camp that introduced us to a young Anna Kendrick. I love this movie. I had a smile on my face. It was laughing from beginning to end. You have Caroline Aaron. You have Amy Sedaris in smaller roles. I wanted more of this movie. I freaking love this movie. I give it the highest of recommendation. Even my friends who saw the trailer was like, this is the movie Jeff would love. And they were right. So, Andre, what did you think as somebody who wasn't quite as big a fan of going to see it?
I thought it was just okay. That's just for me. I kind of wanted more Amy Sedaris, to be honest. I didn't know her part was going to be that small because I thought she kind of would have stole the whole show, but I thought it was fine. I mean, the stuff with the kids was really hilarious, especially the Studio 54 show that they put on. And, it's clearly it's solidly acted and everybody plays their part really well. And you do feel for the leads. Other than that, you have to really, like with you have to have an appreciation for those type of like movies dealing with theater and stage. And it's just not for me, but I would recommend it if you are into that sort of thing. So yeah, that's just my tepid take on it.
Well, the only thing I thought could have been explored more is Io Atabere's character. Why is she there? Because she clearly doesn't know what she's doing. So, but why did she take this job? Like, that could have been explained a little more. But other than that, like I said, I thought the film was flawless. I would not be upset if there was a sequel. I loved like every actor and character in it. Yeah, I loved it. I mean, like I said, if theater is not your cup of tea, you probably are not going to find it as charming. But to me, I was like, yes, please, more. Um, so that brings us to our final film, which we saw together, which is Dumb Money, which is based on the whole GameStop stock market thing that happened during, actually, I don't know why I'm laughing, during COVID 19. First, I will say, though I'm giving it a positive review, did not have the best theatrical experience watching it. As we watched the film, we had a couple that would constantly talk throughout the film, and for some odd reason, not only kick my chair, but also your chair throughout the film. So, even under those extremes, I will say that this movie was very good. I enjoyed it. I like the ensemble aspect where we see the man who first initially started putting his money into this stock and those who followed him and believed in him. And we get to see their own little stories. Because this is a movie, though based on a true life, it's designed to be a David and Goliath tale, where in a feel-good tale, even though it doesn't necessarily have a happy ending for everyone, especially on the poor side, it is something that it's a story that where the audience should feel admiration for these people because they're standing up to big business and the way they do. I unfortunately it didn't really change too much, but at least they tried. Especially when everybody was in dire straits, staying at home, couldn't come out, couldn't really work, and the people who were working were more essential workers and were living paycheck to paycheck. And this film, all star, you have Seth Rogen, Sebastian Stan, you have Nick Offerman, Paul Dano as our hero, Shailene Woodley, Pete Davidson playing himself, Clancy Brown, who keeps popping up everywhere. Let's see, I'm trying to think who else was in this. Oh yes, America Ferrara. The girl from the woman from Bodies, Myra.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, her. I can say from beginning to end, it keeps you interested. It's not as hard hitting as like something like The Social Network, but again, that was made by David Fincher. It was a much bigger story. But it's based on a book by the same writer who wrote the book of The Social Network. So I say it's definitely, since it's still in theaters, hopefully by the time this episode airs, it's still in theaters. Definitely go see it. Highly recommend it. It explains everything and what it was all about behind it. And directed by Craig Gillespie, it is it's not quite like I, Tonya. There's not a lot of talking to the audience, breaking the fourth wall. But it does kind of have that kind of satirical sting to it, even though based on a true story. Like that. I highly recommend it. Andre, what did you think of the movie?
I liked it too. I didn't know too much detail on the GameStop story until I saw this movie, and I agree. It is the David and Goliath tale of the rich versus the have-nots, just the average people trying to make a living and, getting into this stock, and this guy that just was able to predict it really well. And then they try to shut the whole thing down. I think Craig Gillespie lately had been pissing me off with some of the stuff he's done for Hulu, like Pam and Tommy and his Tyson mini series, where he's trying so hard to be like Scorsese with the pop music and the imagery that he tries to do. Here, it's good because he kind of pulls back from all that to make it more grounded and more focused on the everyday people, along with all those CEOs that were all getting bankrupted and doing all these shady practices that were getting them in trouble with the SEC, and balancing that out in a way that wasn't so straight and direct. It still has those moments with the hip hop music and all the pop culture clips around that period during COVID, but nothing that really got me pissed off or oh, this movie is shit. No, everything is good. All the acting, even Pete Davidson's very good in it. I was surprised. And yeah, I mean, it's not doing great business at the box office right now, but I feel like it's one of those movies that's going to find its audience in streaming. That's where I think it's going to thrive, because it definitely felt like a movie that probably would have played better if it had went straight to Netflix as opposed to being out on the screen, which is a sad shame. But at the same time, that's what I believe, is that people will find this movie later.
I agree. I also like how down to earth Paul Dano's character was portrayed.
Kind of likable in this.
Yeah, because if this had been more of a studio film, I'm pretty sure they probably would have gone for like a Joseph Gordon-Levitt, you know. And I like that Paul Dano coming for more independent movies other than the Batman, you know, is like kind of finding his niche, you know, as a character actor, but he can also be a leading man type. I mean, I'll admit Shailene Woodley didn't really have much to do but be, you know, the wife and encouraging of him. You know, wasn't that well written role. And America Ferrara, whose character you thought was going to go further than she did in the film as a whole. Like, even when she was talking to that guy at the gas station, you thought, oh, she's going to run into him. They're going to have a romance. And it was like, no.
Go anywhere with that.
Yeah, it was just like, it was just a moment in her life, you know. And also, Dale DeHaan's character, his little cameo role, like, what was the need for him to have braces? Was that like just a comedic thing they put in to make that character look more pathetic? And shockingly, the biggest asshole of the film is Sebastian Stan's character, which you would think would be Nick Offerman's character, but he's just like, no, this is what I do. Oh, forgot to mention Vincent D'Onofrio's in this.
Yep. But not very long either. He's only like a
yeah, because it was just like, it just felt like he was a name to be there, and this character has to be mentioned. So they're like, let's get a good actor, Vincent D'Onofrio. But it's just like, but you're hardly in it. You're here for 5 minutes. It's, you know, and I'm trying to think, there was another actor we didn't mention other than Dale DeHaan and Vincent D'Onofrio. Special mention in a non-comedic role, Seth Rogen playing arrogance throughout, you know, in Weasley. And I was happy to see the heavenly Olivia Thirlby as his wife. So with this and Oppenheimer, she's having a good year, you know. But would you recommend it or highly recommend it?
I just recommend it.
Oh, okay. I would highly recommend it. I think people should see it, but unfortunately, like you said, it'll probably be more discovered when it comes on streaming. So if you can see it while it's in theaters, go for it. But if this is after theaters, as soon as it comes on streaming, check it out. And this episode, unfortunately, we only have 4 reviews. We didn't have enough time to catch up on more recent reviews, but we promise next episode we will have not only 5 reviews, but maybe some extra to make up for this. So, as always, we have plenty of unfinished business, though our unfinished business right now is coming to an end. But I have to ask, have you seen Blade 2? Directed by Guillermo del Toro. If not, why not? Because it's fucking awesome. Andre, what is the film you would like to recommend this week?
Have you seen The Equalizer 3? If not, why not? Fucking awesome.
We shall see. I have to still check that out. And with that, we bid you adieu.